Chapter 1967. If it had been the previous two critical times, such as during the Wrath of the Lich King period, perhaps the flying mantis would have been useful. Now let's just forget about it. The Alliance's anti-air cannons might have been broken through. In fact, this was only the outermost circle. A mature commander would never allow his army to lack layers and buffers. If he had to link all the troops together and trap all of them, then this commander could be shot. Not only the outermost circle was affected, but also the newbie troops, which were mainly rookies. Think about it, the Wrath of the Lich King and the Wings of Chaos were so coherent. How long had it been since then? Less than 10 years. Most of the veterans who had experienced the last two wars were now lieutenants and sergeants. With them leading, how weak could the Alliance fleet be? To put it bluntly, this was Duque deliberately letting the Alliance military train their troops. If they couldn't even deal with an enemy of this level, then they shouldn't fight against the overwhelming air force of the Burning Legion. Since they were going to lose anyway, they might as well cut their throats and die a clean death. The Wind Elemental Army entered the battlefield, but they didn't participate in the battle. Thousands of huge wind elementals hovered in the air and stared at the front with their dark and unclear eyes. This was the way the military bigwigs expressed their dissatisfaction. Can you little bastards do it? If you can't, then let's go. The veterans who were middle and lower ranking officers in front of them immediately lost their composure and started cursing loudly. Noob. They're already in front of you. What are you waiting for? Change your weapons. Are the rocket launchers and the turrets just decorations? Idiot. Can't you cover your teammates and shoot their butts with the anti-air cannons if you can't hit them? Trash. All of you are trash. This is your last chance. If you can't form an AA anti-air firepower net, then get the F*CK back to the reserves and your official establishment will be revoked. After Duke became the commander-in-chief of the Alliance, he spent 15 years to make the entire Alliance flourish. Not only did he adjust the Alliance to be able to switch between the two economic forms at any time, but he also greatly improved the status of the Alliance soldiers. Those who had served in the army, as long as they retired normally, not only would they be able to take care of the old, the weak, the sick and the disabled, but they would also receive all kinds of enviable benefits. After retiring from the military, there would be all kinds of free skills training. After completing their studies, they would be assigned a job. As long as they didn't slack off on purpose, they would be guaranteed a salary that was 30% higher than the average salary in society. Apart from that, there were other benefits that could be accumulated. Different bonuses were distributed according to the rank of the officers and the battles they had participated in. For example, those who fought against No Cent would receive No Cent mining dividends, which could be distributed until the soldier died. During the Cataclysm, those who fought in the Dragon Slumber Temple received the Twilight Dragon Leather Company limited share dividends. Once you get married, you can enjoy tax deductions. In principle, as long as the child was healthy, it wouldn't cost much for the child to grow up to 18 years old. The Alliance's allowance covered most of the expenses. The worst part was that the Alliance encouraged soldiers to marry 2 wives. Du, who had a guilty conscience, signed a special decree. Active and retired soldiers who married 2 wives and had 4 or more children would receive special subsidies. It was a monthly subsidy that was enough to make ordinary people envious. Children can be raised until they reach the age of 16, when they gradually reduce to a reasonable level. At the same time, the Alliance definitely didn't raise lazy people. If a retired soldier had the ability to work and was under the age of 60, he didn't want to work and had money to spend. Sorry, all the subsidies would not be issued. It was this multi-layered blessing of glory, responsibility, and welfare that forged the lofty status of the Alliance soldiers today. As soon as he said that they should go back to the reserves, the recruits were suddenly shocked. Then, as if they were on steroids, they began to perform exceptionally well. Bang, bang, bang. The 2 barrels of the twin 113mm anti-aircraft cannon roared. This large-caliber anti-aircraft cannon had the longest range, the highest muzzle velocity, and the strongest destructive power among today's anti-aircraft cannons. As long as it was hit, the 5-meter-tall mantis would be like a kite struck by a machete. It would be directly torn apart in mid-air, turning into smelly limbs and flesh. Tutu. The new improved version of the twin 40mm Bofors STAG anti-aircraft cannon had a super high firing rate of 0.8 seconds per round. It was the pinnacle of today's Azeroth military industry. This kind of anti-aircraft cannon with a shorter range was responsible for creating a terrible metal storm in the air within a 2-kilometer range, turning all the approaching flying mantises into pieces. The more the anti-aircraft cannons got into the zone, the more daring they were to shoot. There were even some guys with excellent artillery skills who dared to shoot the dead zone between the ships. As long as it wasn't aimed at the upper deck of their own ship, the 40mm anti-aircraft cannon couldn't penetrate the thick side of the ship. Instead, it could kill the mantis that was about to reach the ship. Of course, there were also people who would take care of the mantis that actually reached the ship. After all, this was a world where magic and technology coexisted. On every Alliance warship, there was a counter-assault team with different levels of professionals in proportion to eliminate the enemy powerhouses that reached the ship. The mantis that was on steroids could be considered powerhouses for the time being. At the very least, ordinary Alliance soldiers who only knew how to use guns and cannons couldn't deal with them. Seeing that the Alliance's rookies had finally stabilized the battle line, Queen CIA's cold expression softened a little. She hooked her finger behind her, and her third sister immediately understood. The Queen has ordered the 4th and 5th Wind Elemental Legions to temporarily retreat. The defeat of these creatures that could already be called mantis demons, and the incomparably pitiful horde airships that were forced to fight by the brainless roar in the sky above Orgrimmar turned into fireballs and crashed. This made the horde like a vicious dog that was forced into a corner and could only bark frighteningly, unable to do anything else. The last step of the focusing rainbow operation. Activate. Duque said softly. It's time to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. With so much foreshadowing, of course the orcs were finished. 30 years ago the orcs invaded Azeroth, opening the prelude to war and destruction. Duque definitely wanted to end all of this. As a transmigrator, how could he not know that Gurus had built a huge underground military fortress in the Raging Flame Rift in Orgrimmar's Dark Alley area? 4 ordinary enemies, Duque might as well let the Alliance train their troops and attack them or something. After all, after the death of the idiot Lich King, the Alliance didn't have any decent attacks. If the goal was total annihilation, then there wouldn't be so much trouble. In the sky, the Dalajan was blocking the southeast, and Naxxramas was approaching from the northwest. Chapter 1968. Looking down from the sky, one could see that this was like a hunt. With the 2 sky fortresses as the core, the Alliance's fleet began to bombard all the tribal targets around them. As long as they saw a humanoid creature, they would immediately fire a cannonball. The cannons were at least 100mm in diameter or machine guns. On the ground, countless elemental creatures appeared. It was the Fire Elemental Army commanded by Majordomo Executus. With the inverted triangular-shaped Fat Fire Elemental as the main force, more than 100,000 elemental creatures slowly advanced, burning everything they could see. The Alliance finally sent in land troops, allowing Agrima's mutated orc army to finally have a place to fight. Ah! They let out muffled, inhuman howls as they charged crazily at the fire elementals. If they subconsciously looked down, they would see colorful insects crawling out from all corners of the dry and cracked red earth, fleeing in all directions with the goal of leaving Agrima. Unfortunately, after being transformed by the Blackheart water in Yashaji's heart, they could no longer be called normal creatures. Not only did the mutated orcs' bodies become uglier, but Yashaji's negative emotional energy also poured into their minds. There was no right or wrong, no self-will, only rage or fear that needed to be vented. What they met head-on was a huge wave of flames created by thousands of fire elementals. The 10-meter-tall wave of flames advanced at every moment, spewing tongues of flame that could burn everything. There was no pity, no hesitation. These fire elementals with weak self-will faithfully carried out their commander's orders. The highly intelligent fire demons were behind them, ordering them around. Something that had never happened in the past 10,000 years was a large group of earth elemental creatures acting as the fire demons' bodyguards. Not every mutated orc had such a violent spirit. Yashaji's negative emotions were diverse. There were mutated orcs who charged to their deaths out of fear, and there were orcs who retreated out of fear. These mutated orcs who had lost their courage screamed and used their sharpened claws to dig into Agrima's towering brick and wood walls, quickly climbing over. Many of them even broke through the walls supervised by the Kukuran guards and escaped into Agrima. They crazily slaughtered any creature that stood in their way. This caused new chaos. Despair, terror, panic, doubt. The pros and cons of the 7 fiends were all revealed at this moment. Just as the orthodox tribe of Orgrimmar fell into chaos, Naxxramas finally arrived at the top of Kalimdor's largest city, which had been built for 15 years and was hailed as the symbol of the tribe's spirit. Orgrimmar was so huge that it almost occupied the entire northern part of Duroder. In real life, Orgrimmar wasn't a small town that could be reached in a few minutes on horseback. Under the management of 2 generations of great chieftains, Orgrimmar was 12 kilometers long from east to west and 8 kilometers wide from north to south. Due to the mountains behind it, the zigzagging city boundaries made it difficult to calculate the area. It was this city that was close to 100 square kilometers that was now under the Alliance's siege. Every single orc who was still sane cried out in alarm when the flying fortress's shadow covered half of the city. They could hear their voices breaking with fear. They could sense the animosity from the Alliance. There was no persuasion, no propaganda. Everything was different from what they knew of the Alliance. They still remembered when Sar was great chieftain, the Alliance gave him almost unreserved support. If there was no food, they would give him food. If there was an injury or illness, they could borrow priests and doctors to cure their addiction to the devil's blood. When Sar said he wanted to go to Nagran to save people, the Alliance gave him a ship without hesitation. The Alliance used to be so kind. Unfortunately, their unwillingness blinded their hearts. They envied the good life of the Alliance people to the point of going crazy, and their ambition fueled their arrogance. At this time, a madman who advocated war resonated with their hearts. Yes, if there was no food, no territory, then they would just rob. Everything was so natural. They raised the banner of tradition and followed the madman to start the war. They saw the Alliance's retreat as weakness, and the small benefits they seized as the prelude to victory. When the Alliance revealed its fiercest claws, the group of orcs who were frogs at the bottom of a well discovered that they seemed to have provoked an opponent that they absolutely could not provoke. Was Garrush wrong to be great chieftain? Did we make a big mistake? We shouldn't have declared war on the Alliance? Ancestor, is Orgrimmar going to be destroyed? Are we going to die? Are the orcs going to be finished? All kinds of negative emotions spread throughout the city, and screams rose and fell continuously. Other than the rough and angry shouts of the Kukuran guards, there was weakness everywhere. So what if Yashaji gave them a stronger body? They couldn't fly. This situation where they couldn't even resist, not even put up a last fight, was what made the orcs feel the most despair. Under the despairing gazes of nearly 1 million orcs, the huge base of Naxxramas that destroyed the Twilight Fortress fell off another layer. Everyone watched in horror as the huge black metal block that was bigger than 10 chieftain halls fell from the sky, aiming at the dark alley in the center of the city. Boom. Boom. It was a loud noise that could shatter the sky and the earth. Every pebble on the ground of Orgrimmar trembled, and in the next moment, they were directly shaken into the sky by the vibration. After being stepped on by countless people, the already solid ground was like a domino. After shattering into countless small pieces, it flew rapidly. From the inside out, it spread all the way. In the next moment, it caused the most exaggerated explosion in Orgrimmar's history. It was a dazzling light that could blind people's eyes. The ear-piercing buzzing made everyone lose their hearing and balance, and their ears were filled with buzzing sounds. After a moment of dizziness, the strongest survivors barely opened their eyes, only to find that in that instant, the explosion had destroyed most of the city, and all the buildings were directly blown away. Dozens of streets were all razed to the ground, and every ruin was screaming and groaning in the flames. The raging fire that engulfed the entire city spread further with the wind blowing from the east to the west. The city that was once full of orc aesthetics was now completely gone, and there were shocking cracks everywhere, as if it had experienced a terrible earthquake. No, even an earthquake couldn't have such amazing destructive power. This was a complete annihilation of the orcs. The remaining orcs had not yet reacted to this earth-shattering explosion when they immediately felt the ground start to shake again. What was this? Chapter 1969. The scorching air current carried the shockwave of the explosion, and blew General Nazgûl, who had just climbed up from the ground, away. As burly as he was blown away in the stronghold deep underground and tumbled a few times. One could imagine how terrifying the attack power of the big bomb was. A large area of the underground stronghold collapsed. When the stronghold was built, there was no expectation of such a terrifying impact. The orcs were only wary of the Alliance's demolition team, but they didn't think that the Alliance would throw a fake, tactical nuclear bomb. Nazgûl crashed through several walls and finally stopped when he hit a rock stratum. His whole body slammed into it, and then he fell into a crack in the rock stratum that was 5 stories high. His body, which had been greatly strengthened by Yashaji's power, was not invincible. He covered his bleeding forehead and climbed up from the ground. He immediately noticed that the stones on the ground were spinning strangely, as if they were dancing some ridiculous dance. The shockwave from the explosion had clearly stopped, although the center of the explosion had ignited a fire. But the temperature under his feet was no less than the center of the explosion. No, this was even worse than that. Gurus Hellscream finally noticed the anomaly as well. The air was filled with the familiar smell of sulfur. It was as if he was in a dragon's lair and was being stared at by an adult ancient dragon. The dragon's breath was so hot that it seemed to be able to burn everything. The dragon's mouth was filled with flames that seemed to be able to burn everything. He had been building his underground stronghold ever since he became the great chieftain. For this stronghold, he had taken away a large number of laborers from various races. And Magatha had helped him transfer these laborers in the name of fighting against the Alliance. The huge underground stronghold was very, very deep. Even a 100-ton bomb like this couldn't blow through and collapse the entire stronghold. Perhaps the layers closest to the ground would become a mess, but as long as the deepest underground palace was fine, Gurus was confident that he could use this underground stronghold to kill all the Alliance invaders and drain every drop of blood from their bodies. At that moment, Garush felt two pairs of eyes on him. It was the gaze of Duke Marcus, whom he hated the most. It was as if there was a holy elephant of Duque standing in the middle of a temple in the void, and Duque was holding his father's shackles with one hand while staring at him with a mocking gaze. There was even a hateful smile on his face as if he was looking at a clown. Duke Marcus, I know you're watching. Come at me if you can. Come and kill me. The Kukkuran guards looked at their boss, dumbfounded, as though they had gone crazy for no reason. In fact, it seemed to everyone that Garush was a little jumpy lately. This time it was different. A voice really came from the void. It was the voice of their strongest enemy. Kill you? I will. But I'm not interested in crawling into a rat hole and pulling out such a dirty person like you. Duque's voice rang out. It sounded like an ethereal voice coming from a tall building in the morning mist. It was full of hallucinatory colors, but every word was clear. What? You dare to call such a majestic fortress a rat hole? The brainless roar exploded. Duque did not answer him. Instead he mocked, you know what? When a ship is about to sink, the first thing to run out is definitely a rat. Hey, what do you mean? Answer me. You bastard Duque. Garush roared angrily but received no response. No, that was not entirely true. Duque responded in another way. Rumble. Rumble. The entire Orgrimmar trembled. Even the entire mountain range that Orgrimmar was attached to was trembling. The terrifying heat began to scorch the lowest level of the underground fortress. So hot. So hot. The Kukkuran guards who drank the Yasha Blackheart water were not immune to elemental damage, nor did they completely cut off their sense of pain. They were still living creatures. They could be hurt, afraid of pain, and they could die. When the lowest level of the underground fortress was torn apart like a fragile biscuit by the sudden appearance of the underground camp, Duque's trump card finally showed its brilliance. Bang. It was lava with a temperature of nearly 1,200 degrees Celsius. And it was definitely not normal fire elemental energy. The flames were violent and the temperature was as high as 8,000 degrees Celsius. Not good. Run. If we don't run, we'll be burned to death. If it was any other situation, perhaps the brainless roar would have killed a few deserters on the spot to warn the others. Unfortunately, in the face of such unreasonable heat, if they did not want to be burnt to a crisp, the only way was to run. Just as Duque had mocked, they ran towards the ground. At this time, the brainless roar finally understood how Duque had done it. No one would have the imagination to imagine that the Lord of Fire, Duque, would be so generous. Duque had directly pumped a large amount of lava from the land of fire south of Mount Hyjal through a tunnel dug by Oro's children, through half of Azhara and into Agrima. If Duque was a true god, perhaps he would have done what the will of Azeroth had done and used the lava from the deepest part of the planet to destroy Agrima. Unfortunately, Duque was not, so he could only settle for the next best thing and use the lava from the land of fire to destroy Agrima. The earth rose in the midst of the rumbling. The tribesmen in the ruins of Orgrimmar did not die immediately. Like the snakes, rats, and ants, they desperately tried to escape the city that they wanted to protect with their lives just a day ago. They screamed and cried. They could not bear the sorrow, pain, and fear in their hearts. In the face of such an apocalyptic disaster, the power of mortals was so insignificant and powerless. Bang, bang, bang. A new crimson mountain replaced Orgrimmar. It grew taller and taller, spewing lava and thick black smoke in all directions. The lava that flowed out of the volcano destroyed everything in its path, whether it was the once majestic palace, the sturdy city walls, or the lifeless bodies. After dropping the bomb, Naxxramas, the Dalajan, and the Alliance fleet had already left the sky above Agrima at full speed. The nearest airship was 3 kilometers away from Naxxramas. At this time, almost all the big shots of the Alliance had gathered in Naxxramas. They were not projections but in person. Everyone had come under Duque's invitation to witness the destruction of the Horde. Duque's gaze seemed to look beyond the present and into the future. His voice was filled with a sense of holiness and determination. Once, Agrima represented the rebirth of the Orcs, the rise of the new Horde, and the freedom from the control of the Alliance. In the past, strong enemies were waiting, and the Alliance had no chance to act. Now, the Alliance will take this opportunity to completely destroy the symbolic capital of the Horde. Chapter 1970. Be it now or in the future, even if the Beastmen have the chance to set foot on this land again, they won't be able to rebuild their city in its original location. This time, we will use the destruction of Agrima to tell any intelligent race on planet Azeroth that whoever dares to follow the Burning Legion or the ancient gods will be wiped off the face of the planet by the Alliance. Kill them all. Leave none alive. Duque declared as the commander of the Alliance. Whoever wants to destroy the planet and make it impossible for everyone to live, we will kill them first. No. Care. Yes. Oh. Just then an even more powerful wave of lava spewed out from the crater. Dazzling flames exploded in the middle of the battlefield. It was a flare brighter than the sun. At the same time, countless roaring lava balls flew out, dragging more land into the burning world of fire. This was not a planet-level attack. The lava in the Land of Fire was not endless. Seeing that it was about time, Duque ordered the Land of Fire to stop. Agrima and Garusha's underground strongholds were destroyed together. But Garush was not done yet. High-energy response. It's a shadow element. Enemy attack. The messenger's voice turned from surprise to fierce. This time there was no need for the messenger to report. All the big shots of the Alliance saw that in the airspace ahead, a scouting frigate had been destroyed by a shadow element light cannon. Boom. The dazzling light caused the dimmed battlefield to suddenly light up again. It was as if night had turned into day in an instant. Duque pursed his lips. Sally broadcasted to the whole Alliance, including those families. Sally understood what Duque was implying. At this time, countless people in the Eastern Kingdom and in the backlands waiting for news from the front lines were pleasantly surprised to see the magic mirrors in the squares suddenly change. The Battle of Agrima was the most important thing for everyone. Due to the information restrictions, everyone could only see the situation in the backlands. News about Duroder was not allowed to be reported. On the screen, a giant wind city of the tribe was being destroyed by a volcano. People of the Alliance rejoice. During the siege of the Horde's capital, Orgrimmar. During Operation Focusing Rainbow, the Alliance dropped a super bomb made of 100 tons of TNT on the Horde. The commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, even summoned a terrifying volcano to destroy the Horde's capital, Orgrimmar. Everyone please take a look. Back then the Alliance lent the Horde a ship to cross the endless sea to the west. Then the Horde spent 15 years building the main city of Orgrimmar on this red land. It's now history. However, we used magic bombs to destroy Theramore and spread the flames of war to every member of the Alliance. The main culprit, Gurus Hellscream, who calls himself the chief of the Orthodox tribes, has yet to be executed. On the screen, dazzling flames had already exploded in the center of the battlefield. There was no need for the higher-ups of the Alliance to give the order. The fleets at the front line were already attacking the enemy. Following the roar of the 400mm and above cannons, a mushroom cloud rose up from the red earth, bringing with it an endless amount of smoke and dust. The shockwave pushed the reddish-brown dust cloud over, blowing away tons of dust and debris. Soon, everyone saw a huge black shield rise around a huge figure, blocking all the explosions, dust and shockwaves outside. That was the power of Yashaji. A higher level of mystery easily rejected the low-level energy reaction. Each heavy cannon weighed more than a ton and nearly 100 kilograms of gunpowder. However, the terrifying explosive power that could blast a 5-story tall tower into the sky was still unable to do anything to the black light shield on Garusha's body. Facing the direct attack of the cannons, the shield only bent slightly and shook for half a second before returning to normal. They noticed that, beside Garush, a huge, ugly heart was beating powerfully. The broken blood vessels of the heart were like a whirlpool, crazily absorbing evil nutrients from the surrounding air. The despair of the Horde members before they died, the wails of their souls and their painful mental fluctuations. All the negative emotions became nourishment for Yashaji's heart. After being transformed by the heart, it was injected into Gurus' body. Although Gurus rushed out of the underground fortress in an extremely disheveled appearance, with more than a dozen charred places on his body, he was ruthless to others and also to himself. He actually used Bloodhowl to cut off the injured parts of his body. Then, in the high magnified vision of the magician's eyes, his damaged muscles were like wriggling earthworms, connecting together and healing at a speed 100 times faster than normal. Many of the Alliance civilians who saw this scene retched. In the command hall of Naxxramas, Duque stood up calmly. It's time. Let's end this. The Alliance's heroes were mobilized for the first time in a long time. Whenever conventional combat power could not defeat the enemy, it was time for the heroes to go out. They were both the leaders of the Alliance and the glory of the Alliance. Looking at the Alliance leaders gathered in front of the portal, the soldiers in the command hall stood up in unison, saluted, and gave the highest respect and blessings to the heroes who were about to go out to battle. This time, Duque could use Otter's Guardians or the 5 Guardian Dragons of the Dragon Sleep Temple. He gave up this right. For no reason, he just wanted to put an end to the 30-year war and grievances between the Alliance and the Horde, as a member of the Alliance. As for Brainless Roar, Duque had already cut him down too much. It wasn't to say that he had cut him down to a dog, but this was no longer an equal battle. In this life there was no great uprising of the Horde. Thrall might have tried, but Thrall, he should have died in the volcanic eruption. Duque didn't have time to sigh. If he could use the volcano move, he had no intention of leaving anyone alive. In the original time and space, the Battle of Orgrimmar, the ultimate dungeon in the Mystery of Pandaria time point, had as many as 14 bosses, a considerable number of which were war machines made by goblin craftsmen. Now Duque couldn't see any of them. In order to prevent the Alliance from invading with mechanized troops, a certain brainless person deliberately made the entrance and exit of the underground stronghold very narrow. In the end, not only did he fail to trick the Alliance, but he also tricked himself in the volcanic eruption scenario. Now there were only 5 bosses left, which was really hilarious. Seeing Duque and his party appear, Gurus let out a deafening roar. Duke Marcus, you despicable person. Don't you dare to fight me fair and square? Sure, first throw away that piece of rotten meat next to you called Yashaji. How about we fight fair and square? The corner of Duque's mouth curled up into a cold smile. Chapter 1971. A fair duel was a joke. This was more like the weak hoping to use moral coercion to ask the strong to deliberately pull their combat power to the same level as the weak. In reality, even if the real strong lowered their power level, they could still achieve victory through their rich experience and unconstrained fighting methods. Different races, different backgrounds, different experiences, different ways of growing up. There were too many differences that created a myriad of differences in individuals. With such differences, how could there be fairness? Speaking of which, I, Dumok, transmigrated openly and relied on my own memory, wisdom, and power to fight to this day. Why should I give up my advantage and fight you openly? What a joke. Duque's disdain could be conveyed to Brainless Roar without words. You destroyed my tribe, you bastard. Why can you steal the power of an elemental lord, but I can't use the power of an ancient god? Brainless Roar roared and shot Duque with a light cannon. The terrifying mental energy that lingered on the battlefield was too majestic. There was no need to deliberately collect it to create a huge amount. The huge and thick black energy cannon was terrifying the moment it was fired. It could probably stuff a destroyer into it. Duque did not make a move. A golden and benevolent figure appeared beside Duque. It was the former Archbishop of the Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. He raised a golden staff that was in the shape of a cross and had a ring on the top of the staff at the right time. Blessing. The classic staff of a priest. As a heroic spirit that relied on the magic net, Alonso's could change his shape or the appearance of his equipment at will. This was the simplest, transmogrification. But what he liked the most was this staff that had a special meaning to priests. The era when this staff was created had a special meaning to him. It was the most glorious era of the Holy Knight profession that he had single-handedly created. Blessing glowed with holy light and formed a huge hemispherical light shield that blocked in front of Duque. All the dark power that poured down was refracted and reflected away, dissipating in the air. Brainless Roar did not know that this scene was being broadcasted to the entire Alliance and the various races that had joined the Horde. Perhaps to him, power was power. There was no distinction between attributes, nobility, or lowness, only strength and weakness. Having always believed in the traditional concept that history was written by the victors, Garusha's way of thinking was simpler and more violent. If he had the upper hand, there was nothing wrong with him doing so. Unfortunately, he wasn't. Without any scruples, he was now covered in a black aura, and any random move he made would sound like the howling of a chilly wind. No matter how one looked at it, he was the ultimate representative of a major villain. Originally in history for the sake of justice and rules, the Alliance and the Pandaren organized a grand trial. Braindead Howl had killed so many people, committed war crimes, and even played the ancient god Yashaji. Braindead Howl, who had committed such a huge crime, had no choice but to give face to the tribe and only be sentenced to life imprisonment. In the end he still managed to escape. Please forgive me for not being able to accept such moronic and idiotic behavior. The live broadcast of the duel was, in fact, a public trial. Since there was no tribe in the way, as long as Brainless Roar fully demonstrated his actions, then justice would be achieved. There would be no mercy. The outcome of this trial had long been decided. Duque was just going through the motions. The tribe has existed for more than 30 years, it's time for a grand curtain call, Duque said calmly in his heart. On the other side, Braindead Howl's light cannon could not deal with Duque. His loyal subordinates roared and pounced on him. General Nazgrin, Markarok, Siege Craftsman Black Isada. These horde bosses, who had escaped the fate of being destroyed along with the underground fortress, continued to show their loyalty. For the horde. General Nazgrin roared and rushed over. For the Alliance. The one who faced him was not his old rival, General Taylor. Sorry, Taylor was not qualified to appear in such an occasion. In front of him was Tyrion Fordring. Tyrion, who was often teased by Duque as His Majesty, was not considered old. He was in his early 50s and despite his white hair he was still quite good at fighting. Nazgrin had not been specially enhanced. He was still a pure orc warrior. His strength came from his experiences. It was rare that Tyrion did not use his surging holy light to blast Nazgrin with Ashbringer. Right now the Empress Dowager was more like a warrior, fighting Nazgrin with the simplest of skills. In terms of seniority, Nazgrin should not have been the one to challenge Tyrion. After all, he was now the chief paladin of the Alliance. He and his Ashbringer had become one of the benchmarks of the Alliance. Just like how Duque had come down to fight Braindead Howl, this battle that was about to destroy the Horde had a special meaning to it. This was the privilege of the older generation of the Alliance, who had directly endured the invasion of the Orcs. They had risen during the second battle at the Dark Portal and became the core of the Alliance. Now that the Horde was about to end, they had to personally wrap things up. That was why the one who blocked Markarok was Gavin Rad. His wind sword had become slightly weaker because Queen Sylvanas had freed Prince Thunderin and wanted to take him in as her subordinate. Gavin Rad temporarily replaced his wind sword. But even with the most ordinary of hammers, he could still suppress Markarok with the skills he had learned on the battlefield for 30 years. Moreover, this shameless thing still had different ideas from the other 5 Silver Saints. After failing to sleep with 2 women at night, Gavin Rad obediently submitted to Duque and obtained eternal life. Now he was more like a bug. He had the body of an 18-year-old, the experience of a 50-year-old, and the ability to combine holy light and lightning attacks at the same time. Even after Markarok had been strengthened by Asha's power, he was still being suppressed by Gavin Rad with an epic hammer. Dressed in golden plate armor, Gavin Rad merely dodged to the side and avoided Markarok's sweeping attack by a hair's breadth. The next second, a hammer hit the Gurus adjutant's face. Holy light mixed with lightning exploded on Markarok's enlarged face, and violent elemental turbulence swept across the red ground. Markarok's giant body was sent flying more than 10 meters away by the impact of the hammer. Only after rolling a few times did he finally stop, amidst the shocked cries of the Kyukuran guards. "Yo kid, you followed the wrong boss. People who use such evil powers will not have a good ending." Gavin Rad mocked. You know nothing about the Horde." Markarok let out an angry roar and charged at Gavin Rad again. Chapter 1972. There was no chance to bring out the large war machines that Garush had prepared in the underground fortress. For example, the Iron Battle Scorpion. Similarly, in this life, Duke Mu did not give Brainless Roar enough time to corrupt the entire Splendid Valley, so there was no Fallen Guardian group of bosses in history. In addition, Duque drove the Horde to Pandaria, so Brainless Roar had no time to do any side quests, so there was no Bloodthirsty Sock, the primitive dinosaur boss that was brought back from the Giant Beast Island. Apart from a few diehard followers around Garush, he still made some achievements like in history. For example, the Dragonmaw clan that had revived the Horde. In this life, the Dragonmaw clan declined with the death of the Patriarch Zulu Hid in the World War II. It was not until the Cataclysm that the Dragonmaw clan returned to the stage of history after Garush destroyed the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands. Overseer Zyra and Garush formed a very close relationship during the Twilight Highlands incident, and she and her Dragonmaw orc promised loyalty to Garush's cause. The terrifying ancestor dragon Garush was a direct descendant of the dragon race's cataclysm ancestor. Zyra rode on its back and appeared in front of the Alliance's powerhouses as a boss. Oh. The group of Alliance powerhouses sighed. It had nothing to do with them again. Duque did not care about what kind of deal they made in order to get into the battle. In any case, what Duque wanted was an absolute crushing and destruction. Basically, every time a powerhouse jumped out from the Horde's side, there would be a corresponding powerhouse on the Alliance's side who would rush up and drag them to the side to fight. As soon as Garush appeared, a countess on a platform on Naxxramas jumped off a building. Everyone in the Alliance knew what Countess Katrana was. Now the countess jumped off a building. Under the acceleration of gravity, the countess's falling speed increased. The strong wind blew her black hair wildly, and her red dress looked like a falling comet from a distance. The countess did not stretch her neck and let out a long roar. In the blink of an eye, the clothes on the countess' back turned into a pair of black wings. Her slender and fair limbs turned into dragon claws covered in fine and solid black scales. Her seductive body was rapidly expanding. It only took about 3 seconds for her to transform from a human to a dragon. When she landed on top of Garaka's head, Onyxia had completely transformed into her dragon aspect form. Garakas, who lacked the experience of fighting a dragon aspect, was caught off guard. Just as it raised its huge head, it realized that its wings had been hit by the opponent's signature, deep breath. After being reinforced and strengthened by the fire elemental realm, the progenitor dragon's entire wing was carbonized when it exploded into a sky full of sparks. The progenitor dragon let out a pained roar. Even after tumbling for more than 300 meters, it still could not stabilize its body. In the end, it was still a primitive creature, unlike the five-colored dragon race. The chromatic dragons were strengthened by the titans, and the truly powerful wyverns could even control the elements to soar in the sky. No one would have thought that the wyvern boss of the Horde would be at an absolute disadvantage right from the start. As Garakas tumbled to the ground, Onyxia used her incomparably proficient flying skills to hover and use her 4 sharp claws to remove parts from Garaka's body. When the progenitor dragon crashed to the ground, creating a huge crater on the red ground, Onyxia also added 2 more legs. She directly used her considerable weight and the kinetic energy brought by the acceleration of gravity to press down on the opponent's lower back in one breath. Crack. It was the crisp sound of vertebrae breaking. Without giving the opponent any room to fight back, the black dragon's mouth, which had countless sharp teeth, had already bitten Garaka's neck. At the same time, Overseer Zyra was split in half by the black dragon's claws. The people of the Alliance could barely see a black shadow flash down. When they could see it clearly, the scene that decided the outcome of the battle had already appeared on the screen. They only saw the Black Dragon Princess, wearing a huge Alliance cloak, defeating the opponent as a mount of the Alliance. Regardless of whether it was the siege craftsman Haisu or the Karakasi heroes of the Mantis Demon, they were all hammered and killed one by one in front of this group of powerful people from the Alliance. This was not a battle of the same level. On the other side, Duque was still playing with brain-dead roar. In the distance, more crown guards who had escaped from the volcanic eruption, madly rushed over, but they were killed by the Alliance elites led by the Silver Hand. In the center of the battlefield, there were not many Horde warriors still fighting. After another fierce clash, Thien used Ashbringer to suppress Nazgrin. Looking at the Horde general who was already riddled with scars, he finally could not bear to see him die. He suddenly whispered, "Surrender. You are not one of those madmen who disregard everything in the lives of the people for the sake of power. You are different from them. If you surrender, I swear in the name of the Holy Light that the Alliance will give you fair treatment." Nazgrin, of course, knew that he could not defeat Thien, but his answer was incomparably loud and clear. "I am Nazgrin, the Fist of the Chieftain, the Horde's commander. If today is the day I die, then I will die gloriously on the battlefield for the Horde." "Is it worth it?" Thien was a little anxious. "Worth it? There is no such thing as not worth it. I am very happy that I am fighting a glorious battle with you. In the end, I stand on the side of the chieftain because this is my mission. If the person who defeats me in the end is you, I will also be very happy. Gurus will lead the orcs to destruction. Are you willing to do that? If the orcs are really going to go extinct, it is the will of the heavens. Otherwise, there will always be a hero who will lead the orcs and our world to prosperity." With that, another fierce clash ensued. This time, Tyrion had miscalculated. In his imagination, it would be another clash of swords and axes. But at the last moment he did not know if Nazgrin's legs gave way, or if Theon still thought that Nazgûl was at his peak. Under the fierce attack of Ashbringer, it directly hit a large gap in Nazgûl's weapon. This directly broke his weapon. After Ashbringer, which was like a door plank, slashed out, it did not stop at will. Ashbringer, which represented the extreme path of toughness, faithfully carried out the power that its master had given it. With a flash of golden light, a huge wound appeared from the right side of Nazgûl's neck to the left side of his abdomen. There was no pain, no regret. On the rough green face that was unique to the orcs, Nazgûl smiled. Although I have lost, it is still honorable. Loktar Ogar? Theon suddenly felt a pain in his heart. He had defeated countless enemies, but he had never thought that he would feel like his heart was being cut by a knife after being defeated. Chapter 1973. At the side, Duque, who saw this scene, secretly sighed. A true hero did not differentiate between strong and weak, noble or lowly, race or age. In the face of a powerful enemy that could not be defeated, perhaps 99% of people would choose to be a coward for life, but there would always be 1 in 10,000 people who would choose to stand up. Such people were often called heroes by the world. In Duque's memory, in the original history, Nazgûl appeared as a small soldier in the wrath of the Lich King. Then, during the Cataclysm, he became an army soldier, equivalent to the Alliance's knight captain. Finally, during the Mystery of Pandaria, he became the general of the Expeditionary Army. He could be said to be the leader of the Expeditionary Army. Some of the players who played with Duque before he transmigrated were also part of the Horde. Especially in Pandaria, there were all kinds of missions, all kinds of encounters, all kinds of ships, all kinds of sinking. But General Nazgûl was a true hero. This warrior caused all kinds of trouble and asked various heroes to clean up the mess, but at the critical moment he showed the courage, ability and wisdom that a warrior should have. It was no exaggeration to say that Nazgûl's entire experience formed an inspirational story of an ordinary orc soldier who grew up step by step to become an independent Horde general. In fact, Duque knew that General Nazgûl was the same as Wujin. There was no difference in their understanding of the Horde. It was just that the path they chose was different. The reason why he said this was because he had a reference by his side, Markarok. Markarok was a traditional orc who was brainwashed by Braindead Roar. They believed that other than Kukuran, any other race, including orcs from other clans, were untouchables. On the other hand, General Nazgûl treated every comrade who fought with him as a companion and a great warrior who grew up with him. Looking at Nazgûl, who was still acting like a human, and the Beastman army that had almost gone crazy, it wasn't easy for him to maintain his rationality under such circumstances, and he still refused to use Yashaji's power. In the past, Duque found it hard to understand why Nazgûl still chose to continue to follow the crazy Gurus even though he was very clear-headed. Later he found out that it was because Gurus recognized him. For all the orcs who were loyal, it was impossible for them to betray their benefactor. Nazgûl reminded Duque of Grom. In order to repay Duque's kindness, Grom didn't hesitate to give up his identity as the tribe's hero and become Duque's personal spirit after death. Even when the Alliance and the Horde were at war and the Alliance was about to attack his son, Grom chose to remain silent. Duque knew that if he gave the order, Grom would definitely attack Gurush with his axe. Duque didn't do this because it was too cruel for a warrior who was truly worthy of respect. It is the father's fault for not teaching his son properly. But how could a father who had been cut off from his path of return and had no choice but to wander in another world for more than 10 years fulfill his duty of teaching? It was precisely because he knew about Nazgûl's deeds that if there was an uprising, Nazgûl would entrust all his hopes for the future of the Horde to the people he trusted. For a general who had already reached this level, Duque could only evaluate him as someone who was absolutely worthy of respect. Sometimes he felt sad for the Horde. It wasn't that the Horde didn't work hard, but the Alliance had him, Duque, as their boss. In comparison, he couldn't have too high of expectations for Sar. He couldn't blame Nazgûl either. After all, Nazgûl was only a rising star of the Horde. It was already very impressive that he could do this. Seeing that Nazgûl had fallen, Duke floated over from afar and spoke into the ears of Theon and the people around him. The Alliance will bury Nazgûl. This decision made Tyrion and the other righteous people feel a sense of comfort. But Brainless Roar was unhappy. He scolded, "Even after death, the warriors of the Horde will only return to the land of our ancestors. You Alliance pigs have no right to profane the remains of the warriors of the Horde." His words stunned the big shots of the Alliance for a moment. Then they burst into laughter. "CKU. What did you just throw out? Whoosh whoosh whoosh." An axe made of shadow energy tore through the air. It was obviously aimed at Duque. It was a weapon of blasphemy. The weapon of blasphemy, which was refined and shaped by Yashaji's power, missed and exploded where Duque was 1/10 of a second ago. The violent explosion created a small, shadowy energy storm that affected everything within a 30-yard radius. Duque nimbly used flash to appear in another place. He smiled lightly. Blasphemy? Sorry. No one blasphemes their ancestors more than you, brainless roar. O Garush, your father is grieving, your ancestors are weeping. Don't mention my ball-less father. Brainless roar attacked again. He stretched out his left hand and grasped in the air. A dark attack filled with negative emotions was unleashed. Despair's grasp. This was a double special skill that contained mental shock and shadow energy. If an ordinary hero was hit by this, even if they did not die from the violent shadow energy, their minds would be destroyed by the endless negative emotions. In the ancient war between the Titans and the ancient gods, hundreds of guardians of the same level as Alexstrasza had their minds destroyed just like that. They became walking corpses. Duque was not interested in this kind of self-torture. He used flash again. This time, Duque appeared 30 meters behind Brainless Roar. For the powerful pharaoh, if he did not stop their almost endless teleportation, there would be no need to fight this battle. Ordinary mages had a cooldown time for flash, and the more they used it, the easier it was for them to make mistakes. After all, flash was a type of teleportation. The more powerful pharaoh was, the more he had no such restrictions. This was especially true on the battlefield. If pharaoh could set up more subtle spatial coordinates, a warrior who relied purely on physical combat would not have the slightest chance of winning. They would definitely be controlled to death. However, the moment Brainless Roar officially absorbed the power of Yashaji's heart, he was no longer a pure warrior. His physical combat skills were still superb. What was even stronger was the power that came from Yashaji. He raised his hand, and a mass of dark energy that completely affected the city burst out from his hands. That was the corrosive vortex, obtained from Yashaji's blood. It looked like the warrior's whirlwind slash. However, every blade of light from the giant axe carried a strong dark aura. Any blade of light could easily cut open the ground, and the surrounding space was dyed in a strange blue and white color. Duque was unmoved. Sigh. Still not willing to reveal your true face? Chapter 1974. If Duke wanted to, an ordinary Brainless Roar could really be dealt with a snap of his fingers, and with a "pa" sound, it would be reduced to ashes without leaving any residue. Regular warriors had no chance of winning against a demigod like Pharaoh, who could turn into elementals. It was like using an axe to chop at the air. It was meaningless. Elementals, on the other hand, could easily crush a warrior. Garush was different. Before, he had no value at all for Duque to make a move. But now, the system had changed his description to Garush, the incarnation of Ashoka. True face? Ah. Duke Marcus, are you so eager to see me slaughter you humans, kill all those damn dwarves, and throw all the elves into the wolves' lair? And those Drenii who are worse than pigs, ha! You will have a chance. I will chop off your head and imprison your soul in a pathetic skull. I will watch you and your alliance turn into ashes. Brainless Roar was really brainless. This scene was directly displayed in front of the millions of people in the alliance. Who knew how many people cursed on the spot, and even more people clenched their fists tightly. Oh, the people in your tribe are almost all dead, Duque mocked. In the distance, the mutated Kukuran guards were still charging over without a care for their own safety. But just the Silver Hand and the Night Elf Sentinels were enough to make them suffer. Not to mention the Kirantor mages, who were all Radiant Moon mages. Only the weak will die on the battlefield. I am the son of destiny. Only the powerful beastmen who survive are qualified to stand behind me. Garush roared and transformed. Garush suddenly opened his arms and arched his body. His neck seemed to be broken and the back of his head touched his back. His swollen muscles finally began to burst, and countless purple-blue veins began to spread out from his shoulders, chest, and thighs. The scene of them wriggling on the surface of his body, as if there were thousands of earthworms rolling under his skin, was simply explosive, enough to make any trypophobia sufferer collapse. Garush's entire body was like a gigantic inflatable doll, and his body rapidly expanded. 1 person tall, 2 people tall, 5 people tall, 10 people tall. In just 10 seconds, the originally 2.5 meters tall burly man had turned into a giant-like monster. The 2 decorative beast fangs on Garush's shoulders had been swallowed by his muscles, and countless spikes grew out of his bones and pierced through his flesh. Blood splattered out, and as soon as it sprayed into the air, clouds of ominous blue and white fog immediately spread out. The pain stimulated Garush's ferocity, causing him to let out a series of barbaric roars that were neither human nor beast. At this moment, if the audience had not seen Garush's true appearance just a moment ago, no one would have recognized this terrifying monster as the great chief of the tribe. Monster. The Alliance audience had a unanimous opinion. Mom, are all tribes so scary? An 8-year-old girl hugged her mother's thigh in horror. Yeah. That's how the big bad guy of the tribe killed your grandfather and grandmother back then. The cruel scene of the battle at the Door of Darkness 30 years ago once again appeared in the middle-aged woman's mind. At that time she was still a child, and she had witnessed the most brutal massacre in the world. On the other side, a large amount of audience feedback came from Duque's magic net. He could not help but sigh inwardly at Braindead Roar's pig-like opponent. Not only did he have an enigmatic self-confidence and arrogance, but he also had the awareness of entering the ultimate villain boss, but he did not have the strength to respond. The positive image of the tribe that Sal had painstakingly created over the years had been easily destroyed by Braindead Roar. This was completely in line with the Alliance's propaganda needs. In front of the gigantic Garush, Duque looked too small. It felt as if Garush wanted to kill Duque as easily as an elephant crushing an ant. The audience watching this scene through the live broadcast was also worried. Dad, will Commander Marcus die? In Gold Flash City, a little boy tugged at his father's sleeve. The father's left arm was empty, and his long sleeve fluttered in the wind, just in time to be tugged at by his own child. His back was perfectly straight, which was the unique posture of a soldier. On his face, which had a long scar that extended from the left side of his face to the left corner of his mouth, a hearty smile that did not match his resolute face appeared. He used his remaining right hand to touch his son's head. Silly child, don't worry. Lord Marcus is not only the greatest commander of our alliance, but he is also the most powerful human in the world. This has to start from when he, as the weakest mortal, killed the commander of the Burning Legion, Sargeras, who possessed the demigod wizard Medivh. At that time he was only the lowest level official wizard. Duque's rise had long been eulogized by countless bards in the alliance. In the past 30 years, Duque had walked step by step from the grassroots to the pinnacle of the alliance's power. He had fought in great battles and finally became a god as a mortal. This story had long been heard by the people of the alliance. But when it was told in this scene, it just happened to add a sense of history to Duque's battle. No problem. Lord Marcus is a man who has killed 2 ancient gods. Battle achievements were confidence. This sense of glory and pride filled the chests of every member of the alliance. No one interrupted the father's explanation, and the surrounding people nodded in agreement. Similar scenes were happening in the streets and alleys of various towns in the alliance, encouraging the new generation of young people to make a declaration of pursuing their dreams towards this great human hero that seems so far away, yet so close at hand. When I grow up, I want to become a great man like Lord Duke Marcus. The people were eager to see the scene of Duque crushing Garush, but unfortunately the live signal began to deteriorate, and Sally Whitemane had to explain on the spot. The Horde's great chief Garush used a large amount of evil god power, which interfered with the magic transmission signal. I'm sorry, the transmission may be interrupted at any time. There was no way around it. Even if Duque filled Azeroth with all kinds of black technology talents, there would still be a situation of unbalanced technological development. Not every world had Da Vinci or Edison. Some things, even if one knew the direction, still needed a huge amount of practice and that 1% inspiration to cross the chasm of failure and set foot on the other side of victory. In fact, even with modern camera equipment, it was destined that the next scene would not be seen. Chapter 1975. A massive amount of shadow-attributed diabolic energy filled the center of the battlefield. Huge energy tornadoes with a diameter of more than 20 meters were everywhere. Blue and white colors interfered with all the elements. The Alliance powerhouses at the scene had their vision distorted by the air and heat, not to mention ensuring the transmission of the live broadcast. Garush used the method of casting a wide net to fill the space within a radius of 300 meters with evil energy that was full of negative mental energy. He was using this method to repel all other forces that did not conform to him. In Duque's mind, countless terrifying scenes also appeared. Unfortunately, Duque was the only special existence in the entire Azeroth. Mental attacks and whatnot, if they could not break through the multiple layers of mental defenses set up by Duque, it would be worse than watching a horror movie. Small pop-up windows appeared in Duque's vision. Unless Duque really wanted to die and put his consciousness into watch, any emotions such as despair, pain, envy, hatred, and other emotions would not contaminate Duque's thoughts at all. At this time, Duque was like a so-called cloud player. He did not play the game himself, but watched the video of other streamers clearing the game. The terrifying and desperate spiritual energy emitted from Garush had already forced many of the Alliance's big shots to retreat. Other than the most strong-willed paladin who could still stand within 200 meters, the other leaders had no choice but to retreat to a safe place. It seemed that Duque was at a great disadvantage. Only those who really knew the ropes knew that Garush was not qualified to be compared to Duque at all. Did they really think that Duque had nothing to gain after traversing thousands of timelines? Stop joking. He had retracted all the branches of the timelines and destroyed all the terrible branches of history, as if wiping away the fog of fate that shrouded the future. Through the authority that the will of the planet Azeroth had given him, Duque finally saw the only answer. It was like the only flame of hope in the darkest night, or like a distant star shrouded in dark clouds, shining with the only light of order in a hazy and chaotic world. Yes, that was the path to becoming a true god. The path to godhood that even Elun could not tell him, and that only the will of the planet was qualified to reveal to him. The true authority of the four elemental realms, the end of the path of magic, and the authority to control the world. Why was it that after the titans of the Pantheon left this planet, the guardians of the earth still had eternal life? As long as their will did not collapse, they could live forever? They had clearly left, so why were the titans able to give their servants an almost inexhaustible amount of power? Where did the time, life, magic, earth, dream, and other extraordinary divine spells of the 5 dragon aspects come from? There was only one answer to all the questions, because the right to use the laws of this planet was already in their hands. The one who made the laws was the true god. Below true gods, all existences with the second highest authority over a certain law were known as demigods in that domain. In ancient times 25,000 years ago, during the Great War between the Titans and the ancient gods, the will of planet Azeroth was awakened. The path to the gods' kingdom for mortals was sealed forever. On the ground, only the races that were recognized by both the planet's will and the Titans were allowed to retain the right to use the supreme authority. For example, the Guardians of Otter and the Pentashade Guardian Dragons. Especially the Pentashade Guardian Dragons, they were forcibly evolved from the primordial dragons of Azeroth using divine power. This was more like an agreement between the Star Souls and the Titans. Only they had the opportunity to open that door and become the saints of the mortal world, which was the demigod. Until the Great War at the Dark Portal, which triggered a change in the world order, a large number of mortal heroes came into being and started this vigorous era. The will of planet Azeroth had no choice but to open a gap in this door again. The relationship between the planet and the intelligent races living on it was a bit like the relationship between humans and parasites such as mites on the human body. This was symbiosis. Without special means, of course, humans could not notice the movements of mites. However, the rotten skin and even internal organs of the human body brought about equally dangerous consequences. Modern people would see a doctor, take medicine, apply ointment, or even perform surgery to expel the disease. And the so-called saints of the mortal world, the demigod, were the executors of these means. Now the enemy was getting stronger and stronger. As long as the will of planet Azeroth still had the desire to live and did not want to be destroyed, it would have to make greater concessions. This time the concession it made was the authority of power. Duque did not know how to smoothly grasp this authority. Perhaps there was no other existence in the world who knew how the god of the weave operated. Duke pulled out the Song of Light and Shadow, and carefully sensed the laws of nature flowing in his body that was becoming more and more condensed. No matter how strong the divine body was, no matter how much the elements were compressed, it could not absorb the entire world's elements into the body. This was a power that was completely different from the elemental power he had. No, more accurately, it was the way in which this power was formulated and used. It had already become one with the world, intertwining with each other. It was as if he could feel the mysterious arcane energy, the calm and cold water elements, and the violent and lively fire elements in this world with every movement. A second passed in the outside world, but after Duque released his spirit sense and perception, it felt like millions of minutes and seconds had passed. As long as Duque willed it, the molecular structure of every fire element, water element, and arcane energy could be magnified thousands of times in his eyes, like a giant picture. And with just a thought he could completely change its structure. Even if it looked the same on the surface, it would become a completely different existence on the inside. This was the law. Although it was still very preliminary and imperfect, like a toddler learning to walk, this method of groping for stones to cross the river far surpassed the billions of living beings in the mortal world. Seeing that brainless Howl had finally transformed into an ugly monster that all intelligent beings in the world with a normal brain would naturally hate, Duque knew that the name Gurus Hellscream, this existence, had completed his historical mission. The long period of indulging him and waiting for him to court death had finally come to a point where he could no longer tolerate it. Let's end this. Duque calmly raised the sword of holy light in his hand. Dark spiritual energy of despair. Brilliant golden holy light. After shaping this scene into a battle between good and evil, everything fell into place. The warmth of holy light, the mysteriousness of arcane spells, the coldness of frost and the blazing of flames, for completely different powers erupted from Duque's body at the same time without conflicting. This powerful touch that was a little confusing to the senses was so powerful that no expert of the Alliance could withstand it, and they had to retreat even further. At this moment, a ray of golden light suddenly pierced Gurus's chest from the front to the back. Chapter 1976. It was a bloody hole the size of a bowl, and one could see what was behind it, which was covered by his majestic body. It was a ghastly sight. Ordinary people would have died long ago. Treating Gurush, who was like an incarnation of an ancient god, as an ordinary person was the biggest mistake. A fatal wound in the eyes of mortals was like a mosquito bite to the berserk brain-dead roar. Ah, is that all you've got? Duke Marcus. The brain-dead roar laughed wildly. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't itch. Is that so? The corners of Duque's mouth curled up into a smile. If the people of the Alliance saw this, they would lose fans. In the distance, Jaina felt a little unbearable. She sighed in her heart. Gurush was completely finished. She had been with Duque for many years before finally going from Duque's disciple to Duque's woman. No one knew Duque better than she did. It had been a long time since she had seen her man show such power. Was this also an aura? Yes. In the face of a powerful monster, perhaps a hero with extraordinary courage would not turn pale and their teeth chatter, but the faint sense of tension could still be felt. There would never be a second person in the Alliance who had the luxury and tranquility of Duque. Whether it was facing the green tide of orcs, the burning legion boss, or the ancient god, Duque's indifference, which seemed to be above all living things, could not be learned by anyone. Mages needed to be calm. If they were not calm, they would recite the wrong spell or confuse the flow of magic in the magic circuit or activate the runes. Dooku was the only person in the world who could be as calm and collected as he was. There was no doubt that this was what attracted Jaina the most about Duque. Gurush's voice, which had become hoarse due to his anger, sounded as if it came from the deepest depths of hell. He glared at Duke with bloodshot eyes and gnashed his teeth as he roared, "Holy light! Damn the power of the holy light! You remind me of those frail Draenei. Very good, I will first wipe out the Alliance, then drag out every Draenei and pull out all of their flesh and bones to make them into leather drums. I will make them remember who, our world, belongs to even if they fall into hell." Tiske. Merritt, who was far away, gritted his teeth. Your damned world is coming to an end. If not for Duque's repeated reminders not to interfere unless something happened to him, Hoof would have been the first to rush up and use her divine axe to give brainless Roar a taste of the wrath of a Draenei. Gurush raised his axe high at Duque. At this moment, Blood Roar couldn't just be called this name. Apart from the fact that it was a single-edged two-handed axe, there were no other traces of its original form. Clusters of blue high-purity shadow elemental crystals wrapped around the axe, enlarging it to match the size of the enlarged brainless Roar. The original, Blood Howl, was probably a decoration inside the gigantic axe. After the surrounding space was filled with a huge amount of Yasha-type dark power, Duque had to be very careful when he wanted to teleport. It wasn't that he couldn't, but the dark power that the opponent emitted was too strong, and it was very likely that it would disrupt the stability of the spatial coordinates at a critical moment. Without Duque's teleportation ability, this was more like a bombardment. Duque muttered in a low voice, "Look at my 100% bare-handed attack." A pair of frost elemental hands as thick as the smallest frigate appeared out of thin air, like a huge palm the size of a dance hall. The giant version of the Blood Howl was immediately clamped. Brainless Roar cried out in shock. He suddenly realized that standing in front of him was no longer the tiny Duque, but a giant elemental giant that was the same size as him. Arcane magic, frost and fire. The perfect mixture of the three elements presented a mixed-colored giant. On the giant's head, Duque sat upright in the frost elemental head. Through the translucent outline of the elemental giant's head, one could see Duque with his legs crossed. Duque and Brainless Roar were essentially doing the same thing. The difference was, Duque controlled the elements and let the elements form a giant outside his body. Brainless Roar's control over the elements was even worse. He had no choice but to stuff all the dark power that carried the negative mental energy of Yasha type into his body. Impossible. Realizing that his strength could not overwhelm this pure elemental giant opposite him, Garush screamed. Pursuing the power of darkness was like using cheats. Using cheats could help you defeat enemies that you could not possibly defeat. No matter what professional player or national team you were, using cheats was the thrill of killing the enemy. It was at this time that Garush found that his cheats were a little ineffective. Duque's giant used 2 frost arms to clamp his axe, but under the giant's armpits, there were actually 4 flame arms of the same size. A pair of arcane palms held the gigantic arms of Brainless Roar, making it impossible for him to exert any strength. Another pair of flame palms slapped fiercely on the shoulders, suddenly clasping Brainless Roar's shoulder blades. The next second, the elemental giant retracted its legs, and its body appeared to be suspended in the air in an anti-gravity state. Garush's brain was not working well. He himself had become bigger, but he was still bound by the gravity of the planet. The problem was that the elemental giant itself could be supported by the wind without a high concentration of elements and condensed into a solid body. His slow thinking caused Garush to be kicked in the stomach by the elemental giant at the same time. Ignoring the elemental giant's body that was parallel to the ground, the elemental giant's movements were more like a snatch. In the blink of an eye, Garush's huge body was strangely dislocated. His arms were fiercely pulled by the elemental giant, and his body was like an old-fashioned cannonball, flying backward with a loud bang. In midair, Garush bent down with all his might and looked at Duque's elemental giant in horror. With his poor knowledge and poor eyesight, he really could not see how Duque had removed his arms. Only the strongest of the strong could see that when the elemental giant used its arcane arms to hold Brainless Roar's arms, Duque had already launched an attack. It was a golden holy light that shot out from under the arcane arms. Anyone with a little elemental sensitivity would be able to detect the powerful holy light. Unfortunately, there was only one word in Brainless Roar's fighting dictionary: reckless. Elemental sensitivity? That did not exist. Relying purely on his eyesight to distinguish the opponent's attack, he did not notice the elemental giant's little movements at all. So his reaction was, "You cheat dash, I didn't." Duque instinctively wanted to deny it, but when he remembered that he had relied on his knowledge of transmigration and the system to create the situation he had today, Duque changed his words. "Cheats. Let's put it that way. You cheat, so do I. It's just that, my cheat is better." Chapter 1977. The scene was too chaotic. The highly concentrated elemental turbulence disrupted the surrounding field of vision, causing the airflow in the entire area to become extremely chaotic. Bystanders could only see a mass of colorful paste churning about, and only the experts with the strongest senses could sense it. In the blink of an eye, the collision of the elemental elements must have happened in many details that were unknown to outsiders. Kale, who was already an elemental demigod, was the most sensitive to elemental fluctuations. Next was Jaina, the mage sister. Sizzle. At the moment the lightning struck, Duque used Song of Light and Shadow to launch 2 rounds of holy light attacks. Boom, 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 crack, crack. Bzzz, the holy light and shadow energy collided. It sounded like a muffled sound, but in fact, it was 7 almost continuous sounds mixed into one loud sound. That's right. Duque launched 7 attacks on each side. 7 attacks made up a round, 1 on each side. One had to admit that Yashaji's strengthening of the Brainless Roar's body was very good. Perhaps the ancient gods had special skills to resist holy light, to adjust their body's resistance to it. Although Duque's first holy sword light cannon had pierced through the Brainless Roar's chest, Duque knew very well that the second one was only half effective. Duque had a lot of experience dealing with this kind of physique. Including the fleeting nature element, the continuous slashes of holy light, arcane, ice, fire, and nature elements made Garush's arms lose the opportunity to use the elements to wrestle with it. Bystanders couldn't detect it, but in fact, after the 5th round of attacks, Garush's giant arms had begun to tremble at a high frequency. At this moment, a sudden wave of shadow energy made Garush's arms completely unable to adapt to it. In the end, it was the gorgeous holy light that was like the rising sun. Yashiji, who could no longer maintain his dark power, lost all resistance under the continuous multi-elemental attacks. Faced with a blazing holy light that emitted a high temperature, Garush's thick shoulder was completely deformed by the holy light within a tenth of a second. The power of the holy light that was gathered to the extreme did not dissipate at all. Almost as soon as the holy light touched the flesh, the vertical surface of the holy light that came into contact with the holy light splashed out radially blue and white waves of flesh. Bang! The elemental giant, who was in the air parallel to the ground, gave a kick, causing even more elements to explode in their original positions, bursting forth with even greater shockwaves spreading outwards in circles. It was a ripple formed by a mixture of many elements. It mixed up the surrounding dust and gravel and rolled into an elemental storm, turning the surroundings into a mess. As for the giant version of Brainless Roar that was kicked away by the elemental feet, its condition was even worse. Even though his huge body had already flown into the air, the shockwave brought about by the huge air pressure was still like plowing the ground, causing the incomparably exaggerated cracks on the ground to extend backwards. Finally, after flying for more than 300 meters, he crashed into a section of Orgrimmar's city wall that had yet to completely collapse. More cracks appeared on the already crumbling wall, and 3 seconds later, it collapsed with a loud bang. This was not the end. Duque gave Queen Shi a small look. Queen Shi elegantly raised 2 fingers. Snap. A crisp snap of her fingers. A gust of strong wind swept across the red earth that was filled with turbid energy turbulence. Everywhere it passed, everything in its path was blown away. Most likely, it was blown into the riverbed of the River of Wrath. At the same time, a flame whip extended from the elemental giant's flaming arm, like a lasso. In one breath, it wrapped around the neck of the Brainless Roar who had fallen into the pile of rubble and pulled him back. The elemental giant stepped on Brainless Roar's back, and Brainless Roar's huge face sank more than 2 meters into the ground. It was only when the turbulence dispersed that the surrounding people saw what had happened. The faces of the crown guards who had not died all showed a look of horror at the same time, and they screamed in unison, "No!" Those with insufficient perception had already missed many of them. The mortals could only see the Brainless Roar being stepped on in the bloody mist that filled the sky. Those with sharp eyes saw that the elemental giant had elegantly thrown away the 2 huge broken arms, and at the same time, the wounds on the arms and the body were spurting out blue and white blood filled with an evil aura. The live broadcast returned to normal, and every member of the alliance had their mouths agape. They had always heard about how powerful the experts of their own alliance's hero squad were, but only when they saw this scene for themselves did they realize how powerful their boss was. On the other side, the crown guards seemed to have seen the most unbelievable thing in their lives. Their expressions clearly showed that they did not believe that their great chief would be defeated. No one had expected that the battle would end just as the warm-up was over. No. I haven't lost yet. I haven't. Garush was still struggling violently below. Everyone could see that his ghastly wound, which could easily allow a tank to pass through, was actually healing. Countless earthworm-like muscles regenerated, and 2 new arms were forming. Unfortunately, these 2 arms now looked like the size of a normal orc, and it seemed that it would still take a while for them to grow to match their current huge size. It's over, Garush, whether it's you or the tribe. Duque's proud voice instantly spread throughout the battlefield. Then the elemental giant turned back into 2 arms, and it raised a single-edged 2-handed axe that looked very similar to Bloodhowl, except that the axe was made of the purest fire element. Crack, crack, crack. It was like chopping wood. The elemental giant's axe chopped down again and again on the neck of the gigantic Garush. It had to be said that the body that had been strengthened by the ancient god's dark energy was really tough. Unfortunately, under Duque's rapid elemental switching, even the toughest neck would be finished. A cracking sound came from the cervical vertebrae and everyone could hear it. It was the sound of the cervical vertebrae shattering. But before the cervical vertebrae were cut off, the red earth that carried the gigantic Garush seemed to be unable to withstand the elemental giant's fierce attacks, and it began to sink with a rumble. Of course, Duque knew that it was actually the rising volcano that caused the surrounding horizon to sink. But it looked like the elemental giant's fierce attacks had instantly pulled down the land south of Agrima by dozens of centimeters. This scene caused countless mortals to cover their mouths in shock. What kind of great power was this? Uplifting mountains, severing rivers, falling stars, capsizing oceans. This kind of power that mortals could not imagine was too exaggerated. Was this the end of the mortal power, the lofty appearance of supreme divine power? Chapter 1978. The magic communication projection in the Alliance was not some mass-produced TV. The large illusory three-dimensional screen used for publicity required a magic transmission node to be set up in advance, and then at least one sky mage was sent to monitor the flow of magic. Therefore, at most, a large screen could be placed in every densely populated area. On the screen, the super elemental giant controlled by Duque chopped down on brain-dead Roar's neck like a log. Originally, every square in the Alliance was always full of discussion and low exclamations, making the square seem noisy. But at this time, every square in the Alliance seemed to be under some kind of silent spell, and the squares of all sizes gradually quieted down. The silence was just an illusion before the storm. 1 chop, 2 chop, 3 chop, 7 chop. When the elemental giant's axe was finally like an executioner, ruthlessly chopping off Gurus's huge and ugly head. The crowd continued to be quiet for a few seconds. But in these few seconds, it felt like the emotions of all the Alliance people were like springs that had been pressed to the bottom. Pressed to the end, it was either collapse or the most thorough explosion. Sally Whitemane's excited voice just happened to ring out at this moment. Did you see it? The people of the Alliance. Every soldier who fought or stuck to their post. Did you see it? Just now, the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, His Excellency Duke Marcus, finally used his elemental giant to chop off the head of the Horde's chief, Gurus Hellscream. The death of Gurus, who colluded with the ancient god Yashaji, symbolizes the destruction of the evil Horde. The Alliance has won. Long live the Alliance. The excitement that had been brewing for a long time was finally released at this moment. Boom! The next moment, the cheers of countless Alliance people burst out, resounding through the sky and resounding in every corner of the Alliance's territory. From the most prosperous and prosperous Eastern Kingdom continent, to Snow Northrend, which had long been allocated, to Kalimdor, which had been in constant conflict for more than a decade, and finally to Pandaria, which had recently joined the Alliance. On every continent in Azeroth, the fanatical cheers of the Alliance people soared. Long live the Alliance. We won. The soldiers raised the weapons in their hands and their fists. The passionate girls kissed every Alliance soldier they saw. The older generation of the Alliance kept wiping away their tears in excitement. The cruel images of their homes being destroyed by the Horde flashed in their minds like a movie, and the voices and smiles of their loved ones who had lost their lives kept replaying in their minds. Long live. In front of Orgrimmar, the Alliance soldiers chanted all sorts of slogans, killing every single mutated beastman. It's over? Queen Sin, Muradin Bronzebeard, Jean, Tyrion, Gavin Rad, and the other elders who had participated in the second battle of the Dark Portal were still in disbelief. It's over, Duque said with absolute certainty. Below him, the giant Garush who had lost his head could no longer maintain his form. A large amount of rancid blue and white liquid flowed out of the corpse and was purified by the holy water that Duque had prepared beforehand. Nearly 10 flying transport ships were pouring holy water from the Naru to the scene. ZZZ. Without the support of evil energy, Garush's body shrank rapidly. In less than half a minute, he had become a headless and handless corpse. Sigh. The sigh of an old Horde hero echoed in the weave. Duque didn't know how to face Grom. No matter how he dealt with this matter, it would only become awkward. Duque shook his head and told himself, I'm a human of the Alliance. With a light tap, the elemental giant who had just displayed his might was annihilated in the air, and all the elements returned to their respective elemental realms. Phew. Letting out a long breath, Duque looked at the brownish-red soul that was leaping in his palm. There was still a remnant of Garush's soul that hadn't disappeared, and it kept roaring angrily. Unfortunately, his soul was imprisoned in that palm-sized place by Duque. Without hesitation, Duque put his palms together, and his powerful soul power crushed the last of Garush's soul. Duque sighed. It's finally over. If he had killed Garush, there wouldn't have been the so-called King of Draenor. Duque really had enough of those damned enemies who didn't die cleanly and came back to cause trouble. The Pandaren leader, Zhu Talon, stepped forward. Commander, actually, we Pandaren think that a fair trial would be better. Duque didn't back down. The Horde has brought tens of millions of casualties to the Alliance. This disaster is more serious than the damage caused by the Horde in Pandaria. The Alliance has tried to solve the problem in a peaceful way, gathering the power of all the intelligent races in Azeroth to face the Burning Legion and the Ancient Gods. I'm sorry, but the Horde has let down the Alliance's good intentions. So, this is the trial the Alliance has given the Horde. Kill the Great Chief. Destroy them all. Alright, I'll report this to Emperor Xiaohao. Emperor Xiaohao will understand the alliance's actions, Duque said solemnly. A few days later, on the wasteland of Splendid Valley, erudite Zhou and a group of alliance heroes witnessed the appearance of Xiaohao's soul. With the help of the four gods and Xiaohao, Splendid Valley regrown its first tree, symbolizing the end of the war in Pandaria and the beginning of the reconstruction of Splendid Valley. More importantly, the alliance held a throne meeting while sending millions of soldiers to clear out the remaining orcs on the Kalimdor continent. Duque sat on the commander's throne, and a dozen or so alliance leaders sat in a ring of thrones. Everyone's eyes fell on the few special representatives at the bottom of the throne. Duque cleared his throat. Let me emphasize. The Darkspear trolls only represent the Darkspear tribe. The High Elves and humans used to form an alliance, which is different from the Amani trolls and Dark Branch trolls. Just like how the Blood Elves and Night Elves are now different races. Is everyone clear now that I've put it this way? The leaders nodded. Alright, now the alliance will hold a public vote on whether or not to allow the Tauren, Darkspear trolls, and the Forsaken to join the alliance. Leaders with voting rights, please raise your hand. Below, Ben, Wajin and Dranos were all anxious. The Horde was done for, and the era of the alliance's unification of Azeroth was inevitable. As the core race of the Horde, joining the alliance was the only way out. In the past week, the alliance had cleared out millions of Horde that were dominated by mutated orcs. Now the three races added up to only a few 100,000 people, and if they really fought, it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the alliance's teeth. So, taking advantage of the destruction of the Orthodox Horde, the three races jointly applied to join the alliance. Chapter 1979. Strictly speaking, the three races had no territory to speak of. The Darkspear trolls and the Taurens were now in a parasitic state. Winterspring, where the Forsaken were, could hardly be considered their territory. The key was that there were a large number of blue dragons and half-dragons in Winterspring. If the alliance wanted to provoke a conflict, based on Duque's current relationship with the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Forsaken would be finished if they used Kalego's name to mobilize for war. The situations of the three races were different. The Taurens were the most relaxed. Historically, the Taurens loved peace and had their own traditional territory. They had never fought with any race in the alliance. The Taurens, who believed in nature and shamanism, also had an important influence in the Cenarian Circle. Now the Cenarian Circle was led by Malfurion. Although the Circle did not have voting rights in the alliance, it had enough influence. After all, behind the Circle stood a group of wilderness demigods led by Cenarius. Bane knew very well that if they did not join the alliance, then the fertile grassland that the Taurens had lived on for generations in Magroliai would have to say goodbye to the Taurens forever. This was a very realistic matter. After Duque announced the start of the Throne Conference voting on the Taurens joining the alliance, as expected, Tyron was the first to raise her hand in agreement. Privately, Tyron had already informed Duque. In fact, the Taurens joining the alliance was beneficial. Malfurion, who lacked political brains, had stupidly come over and put down his pride to plead with his childhood friend. As a result, Tyron had earned a favor for no reason. Of course, Duque would not be jealous. After all, he had let Malfurion have the green grassland on his head. The voting results were out. Duque announced in a clear voice, "Very good. The Throne Conference has unanimously approved the motion of, let the Taurens join the alliance, proposed by the Cenarian Circle. Here, in the name of the alliance's commander, I announce that the Taurens are welcome to join the alliance." The Throne Conference suddenly broke out in warm applause. Bane was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. It was not easy. His father had been murdered by the brainless Roar, and it was later proven that Magatha Grim Totem had poisoned him. After the alliance caught Magatha, they passed the traitor to Bane and let the new Chief Tauren kill the enemy. Compared to personal grudges, the reproduction of the Tauren was more important. Allowing him to kill his enemies with his own hands could be considered a political show. Only by truly joining the alliance would he be able to regain his most important territory. Bane's voice choked. He was also an honest boy. Thank you, leaders. Thank you for the recognition and support of the alliance countries. Although we Tauren love peace, we never bow to evil forces. If you need our Tauren's help in the future, please feel free to give us an order. Next, the return of the territory of Mogaliai that was currently under the control of the Alliance military and the reconstruction of the fallen areas would naturally be carried out. Generally speaking, the Cenarian Circle was responsible for restoring the ecology there. Other than building a railway into the collapsed Thundercliff area, The alliance had no other requirements. The treatment of the Minotaurs made the other two races very envious. Wuxia actually thought about whether to persuade the other two leaders to let the three races join the alliance together, but he gave up. Such a method would easily infuriate the alliance. If Duque were to use the veto power that he did not have on the surface but in reality, the three races would be finished. The beastmen were done for and the three races didn't need to die with them. Next it was the Darkspear Trolls' turn to vote. Compared to the Tauren, the Darkspear Trolls not only had no advantage, but they were at a great disadvantage. It was said that the Darkspear Trolls had nothing to do with other trolls, but what the leaders of the alliance countries thought was another matter. Not long ago the Zandala Trolls gathered the Amani, Gurubashi and Frost Trolls and other troll races. They openly robbed the alliance's ports and ships, and established the Zandala nation in Pandaria to fight against the alliance. This proved that the trolls had the ability to connect. This kind of thing was quite taboo. Compared to the lively scene of welcoming the Tauren into the alliance, after Duque announced the start of discussion on the Darkspear Trolls, the atmosphere of the scene became cold on the spot. It was as if a black hole had appeared in the middle of the venue, sucking away all the temperature. It was frighteningly cold. There were too many alliance countries that had conflicts and wars with the trolls in history. Just give a few examples. The Sin Dorii kingdom, where Queen Shay was from, was preceded by Kuel Salis, who had fought with the Amani trolls for thousands of years, and was even more pressured by the Amani trolls. The previous king, Anastrian, had condescended to communicate and form an alliance with the humans, at the cost of teaching magic to the humans, and that was how the Amani trolls were defeated. On the Lordaeron continent, many kingdoms had fought with trolls. For example, the Wildhammer Dwarves, the Evil Branch, and the Withered Tree clan of the Eagle Nest Mountain. Another example was the king of the Stormguard kingdom, Danath Trollbane. God's mother Trollbane, itself meant troll killer. There were also the Frost Mane Trolls and Winter Axe Trolls all over the snowy mountains of the Eastern Kingdom continent, respectively harassing Alterac and Dan Molo. Further south was the Stormwind Kingdom, which often fought with the remnants of the Gurubashi Empire. It was no exaggeration to say that just by looking at the trolls' race, they had offended most of the alliance to death. Wuxia knew he had to do something. He stepped forward, bowed, and put his right hand on his left shoulder. Respected leaders of the alliance, the great commander of the alliance, Wuxia, the leader of the Darkspear Trolls, would like to speak. Go ahead. Duque agreed. Wuxia cleared his throat. Before voting, I would like to emphasize on behalf of the Darkspear Trolls that there is a very big difference between trolls and trolls. Just like how humans formed today's 7 kingdoms through reproduction and competition for territory over a long period of time. The trolls have also split into many different races and kingdoms over the last 30,000 years. Wuxia spent 5 minutes briefly explaining the structure of the trolls. The Zandala trolls were the ancestors of all trolls, so the Zandala tribe was a relatively special branch of trolls. They were born with a righteous name. They split into 4 major branches. Forest trolls. Represented by the Amani trolls, there were clans such as Fire Tree, Evil Tooth, Evil Branch, Rotten Moss, Burning Thorn and Deadwood. Sand trolls. Represented by the Sand Fury clan of Zul Farakri in the Tanaris Desert in the south of the Kalimdor continent. Forest trolls. Represented by the Gurubashi clan, there were clans such as Bloodtop, Darkspear, Shatterspear, Skullbreaker, Atal, Ai and Hakari factions. Frost trolls. Represented by the Dakarai clan that established the Godak Empire in Nocent, including the Frostmane clan and the Winter Axe clan. Chapter 1980. Woken concluded, so the Darkspear Trolls are just the most insignificant branch clan of the Trolls. They have no righteous name and have never established an empire. There have been no wars with the various countries of the Alliance, and there have been frequent wars between the Trolls in history. So I hope that the leaders can judge the Darkspear Trolls as an independent race. Woken's speech caused a whisper among the leaders of the Alliance. To be honest, Woken had no confidence in joining the Alliance. It wasn't that he didn't try. For example, he had previously sent something similar to a visitation card to Queen Sylvanas, hoping to see the Queen. Woken was very wise. He probably knew Queen Sylvanas's position in the Alliance. As one of Duque's harem, if Queen Sylvanas took the lead in opposing, then the Darkspear Trolls would have no chance of joining the Alliance. With a pillow talk, Duque had 1 vote, Queen Sylvanas had 1 vote, Kalia, Alicia, and Jaina each had 1 vote. The Darkspear Trolls didn't even need to look at the votes of other countries. Unfortunately, Queen Sylvanas did not accept his request for a meeting. This undoubtedly poured cold water on Woken. Woken was very nervous. He went from the chief of a small clan to Sal's former deputy, relying on his wisdom. Through that period of time as an advisor, his knowledge was constantly growing. In fact, from the moment the Darkspear trolls withdrew from the tribe, he had been thinking about the future of his people. The conclusion was very discouraging, but he had to accept the reality. If he couldn't join the alliance, the Darkspear trolls would never have a chance to rise. His nervousness, his apprehension, all fell into Duque's eyes. But Duque was laughing his head off. On the surface, Duque was still that high and mighty demigod, the commander-in-chief of the alliance who held great power. However, the fluctuations in his heart were all reflected in his elemental waves. At this moment, Duque, who seemed to be doing nothing, was laughing in the Magic Net communication private chat group that only connected to his harem. Yo, Sylvanas, what if I told you that one of the futures I saw? After the tribe experienced the terrible Great Chief Braindead roar, Woken came to power and became the Great Chief. Do you believe it? Yes. Queen Sylvie gnashed her teeth. Even if you tell me that another me will become the chief of the tribe in the future, I will believe you. Everyone knew that the traditional orcs had declined, and the reorganized tribes would definitely look for a new balance point. If it's not Woking, it's another me or another Lorthamar. As a super powerful person who had traveled through time and space with Duque and collected other timelines, the demigod Queen Sylvanas was no fool. She knew how things would develop. He thought about how he had died in another timeline and became the ugly and cold queen of the Forsaken. His little brother Theron had even become a big shot. This feeling of nonsensical nonsense made Sylvanas feel extremely vexed. The girls next to them all giggled. That's why I won't let go of a talent like Wajin. Just him alone is worth taking down the entire Darkspear troll. Then why are you still waiting for Woking? Kalia was a little puzzled. In the private chat group, Duque's 3D projection shook his head and said with a narcissistic look, "Since ancient times, deep love can't keep people, only tricks can move people's hearts." Queen Sylvanas was the first to react. Tyrant was a little annoyed. "You bastard, you obviously tricked us like this." Jaina's illusory image waved her small fist. Although the private chat group was noisy, the voting scene was very ugly. Stormwind objects. No one expected that the first to jump out to object would be William. As someone who had fought against the jungle trolls for a long time, Stormwind did not have a good impression of the Darkspear troll branch of the jungle trolls. Considering William's identity as the Alliance's deputy commander, this vote of objection made Woking's heart skip a beat. Stormguard objects. Iron Furnace Castle objects. Eagle Nest Mountain objects. Woking's head was dizzy with the noise of the objection votes. He was in despair on the spot. The elves, who had the deepest hatred for the trolls, had not yet voted, but the humans and dwarves had jumped out first. What hope was there? Helplessness and bitterness surged in his mouth, and Woking almost mechanically turned his head to look at Sylvanas. It was not that he had any hope for Queen Sylvanas, but he was waiting for Queen Sylvanas to pass the final judgment anyway. Who knew, the green eyes that were supposed to be filled with anger were a little thought-provoking. Queen Sylvanas spoke, "Mr. Woking is right about one thing. The same origin does not mean that they are all evil. Just like how we cannot confuse the Eridar tribe who joined the Burning Legion with the Drenii tribe who believe in the Holy Light. Unfortunately, I do not know much about the Darkspear troll, so the Sin Dorii kingdom has voted to abstain." This was truly a case of finding a way out at the end of the tunnel, but a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Woking was originally in despair, but who knew that the Blood Elves, who were most likely to oppose the Darkspear troll, would abstain. The Drenii tribe has decided to give the Darkspear troll a chance. We vote in favor. Imriel cast the first vote in favor. Then Korea followed suit. There were a lot of tricks in the voting of the throne meeting. Not counting the connections beforehand. The voting was not necessarily fair. If it was really fair, it should be announced that after the voting, everyone would write the decision, seal it in an envelope, and then announce it together. Now, although the leaders represented the will of their own tribe or country, there was a hierarchy of votes. The leader who voted first had the greatest influence, and his decision would definitely affect the leaders behind him. Moreover, the influence of Duque's harem and Kale, that was too great. The few who had the right to vote deliberately delayed the voting, forming a virtual manipulation. When all the countries and races with the right to vote had finished voting, a spectacle was formed. The votes for and against were actually tied. It just so happened that according to the rules of the Alliance Throne meeting, in addition to each country and race with the right to vote, there was also a special existence with the right to vote, and one vote was equal to 2 votes. That was the supreme commander of the Alliance, Duque. It was really strange. Perhaps some of the Alliance leaders who voted against felt that something was wrong. In fact, after today, Duque would naturally change the rules to make the voting more fair and reasonable. But today your Grandpa Duque is the one who's in charge. Woking looked at Duque with anticipation and desire. Duque said, "Woking, is there anything else you want to add?" Woking lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Please give the Darkspear Troll a chance to prove itself. As long as we can join the Alliance, the Darkspear Troll is willing to lower its status and join as a vassal race." Chapter 1981. The races and organizations in the Alliance were divided into 3 classes. The first class would definitely be the countries, races, and organizations that had the right to vote in the Throne Conference. Once any member was attacked by an enemy, it would be seen as a declaration of war against all members of the Alliance. The second category was the independent military, paramilitary organizations, and races that cooperated with the Alliance. They had the obligation to participate in defensive battles, but not offensive ones. They had the right to propose a limited number of motions at the Alliance Throne Conference each year, but they did not have the right to vote. The most famous of this level were the Cenarian Circle, the Silver Hand Knights, the Silver Dawn, and the newly promoted Naga tribe. The third tier was the vassal races. To put it bluntly, they were equivalent to a slave army. They could only follow the decisions of the Alliance throne unconditionally. Currently there were Murlocs, Encouraged Bugmen, and Bear Monsters at this level. Wujin was willing to lower himself to the 3rd level. This was for the future of his race. He didn't even care about his moral integrity. If the 3rd tier entered the Alliance, they would at least be on the same side. Perhaps they would be treated as cannon fodder, but at least there was hope. As a matter of fact, Naga had already been upgraded by 1 level, and it was said that the Karaji insect people might also be upgraded by 1 level. The Alliance would consider the merits of the vassal races. Unexpectedly, Duque said, "Mr. Woken." The Alliance throne was currently discussing whether or not the Darkspear Trolls had the right to join the Alliance as a first-tier race, not demotion. If you want to downgrade, please withdraw this proposal and reapply to the Alliance for a vote. Are you sure you want to do this? Wujin was stunned. He really wasn't good at pseudo-democracy. His mouth trembled, not knowing what to say. If they withdrew the proposal, wouldn't it be a waste of the leader's time? With a belly full of anger, it was possible that those who voted for it would change to vote against it the next time. Was there anyone who didn't want to work in the 1st rank and ran to the 3rd rank to be a lackey? Staring at Duque for a long time, Wujin couldn't see anything. But when he thought of how Duque had allowed Sal to bring more than 100,000 orcs who had escaped to the west in order to fight against the Scourge army, Wujin understood. No. I believe in the foresight of the Alliance leaders, and I believe in Commander Marcus' judgment of the future even more. Downgrading was just to express the Darkspear Troll's strong desire to join the Alliance. The Darkspear Troll and I believe in and accept all decisions made by the Alliance. Wujin bowed and lowered his head. In a certain private ManaNet communication group, it had long since exploded. Yo, the little troll is pretty smart. Is it really like what Duque said? Tricks move people's hearts? Hehehe. Duque, you're so bad. Duque pretended not to hear the complaints of his harem. From another angle, to be able to operate in the Alliance also proved that Duque's influence was unparalleled. Alright, I will announce my decision as the commander of the Alliance. In reality, this is also the decision of this throne meeting. The decision is, agree. Duque finally revealed a smile. His body was lifted by the fire elements and floated down. He arrived in front of Wujin and extended his right hand. Welcome Darkspear Trolls to the Alliance. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wujin's hand was very big. He tried to control the strength and angle and shook hands with Duque. As smart as Wujin was, of course, he thought that it was likely that Duque was operating. Knowing this, he still felt a burst of excitement. There was no need to be afraid anymore. The Alliance was a behemoth, and as an enemy, it was undoubtedly very terrifying. Once he entered the Alliance, it would be a different story. Perhaps he would be targeted in the future, but Wujin believed that as long as he and the Darkspear Trolls were truly loyal and went all out, the Alliance would not regard the Darkspear Trolls as cannon fodder. For some reason, Wujin had this premonition. The last Forgotten Ones were also quite controversial. After all, it was a debate between the living and the dead. Before, when the Trolls joined the Alliance, it was ultimately a battle between some races and kingdoms. The addition of the undead was a conflict between the Forgotten Ones and all the living. From the beginning, Delano was very smart not to target the first tier for the application. In the Alliance, especially in the human countries, the Alliance inheritance law was passed. The undead were not allowed to have most of the living's rights, such as inheritance of land and so on. Except for non-ancestral weapons and armor, the undead were not allowed to have them. The most obvious case was Alexandros Mograine. His son, Darian Mograine, continued to exist as an undead, but old Mo directly announced that the family was extinct, and all the Mograine family's inheritance would be inherited by the adopted daughter, Sally Whitemane. Although the Forgotten Ones applied to join the Alliance as a cooperative organization, it still caused a great deal of controversy. In the end, Delano agreed to a series of terms in a humiliating way before he was allowed to join the Alliance. 1. The leader of the Forgotten Ones was changed to Darian Mograine. 2. The Forgotten Ones were strictly prohibited from obtaining new members by resurrecting the corpses in the graveyard of the Alliance member states. 3. All Alliance soldiers must write a notarized will and sign a life and death contract before going to the battlefield, and decide whether to agree to resurrect, as an undead if they die in battle. If they choose to resurrect as an undead, they will lose all the rights of the living, such as the most basic right to visit their loved ones. The application of living relatives would be approved separately. After tossing and turning for a day, the proposal for the three races to join the Alliance was finally passed. The Horde was destroyed, but the war was not over. For the time being, the orcs all over the barren land in Duroder were still stubbornly resisting in the corners of various caves. The most crucial issue was that the problem of the other main race of the Horde, the Goblins, triggered a new war. The Goblins were extremely greedy. There was nothing that couldn't be solved with a bag of gold coins. If there was, then 2 bags. Duque and other Alliance leaders really underestimated the Goblins' obsession with wealth. After the Hot Sand Conglomerate collected a huge amount of life-saving money from the Rustwater Conglomerate's Goblin Prince Garavix, they actually announced to the Alliance that the Horde was destroyed, the Rustwater Conglomerate had left the Horde, and Garavix was innocent. The Alliance had no right to ask the neutral Hot Sand Conglomerate to hand over Garavix. In private, the Hot Sand Conglomerate contacted the Alliance. "I can hand over Garavix, but please give me some money." Not much, just 10 years of taxes from the Alliance. Otherwise, the Hot Sand Conglomerate would be exempted from taxes and inspections when doing business in the Alliance. There was a saying that you wouldn't die if you didn't court death. The Goblins thought that the current Alliance was just an ordinary organization that had to give face to the Goblins. Who knew that the arrogance of the Goblins angered the Alliance? The Throne Council voted that because the Hot Sand Conglomerate harbored the war criminal Garavix and a large number of tribal members who fled to Gadget Sand in the Tanaris Desert, the Alliance announced that it would deny the Hot Sand Conglomerate's self-proclaimed neutrality and declare war on the other 2 Goblin consortiums, the Venture Capital Company and the Hot Sand Conglomerate. Chapter 1982. The Goblins were dumbfounded on the spot. The Alliance's move was undoubtedly a declaration of war against all the Goblins. The Goblins claimed to have 5 major trading princes. No one knew who the hell the other 2 were. Were they interstellar goblins or some other goblins? Anyway, there were only 3 goblins on planet Azeroth. In addition to the tribe twice, there was the Rustwater Conglomerate that had invested in Old Jiang for 49 years. There was also the hated Venture Capital Company and the Hot Sand Conglomerate that had the most territory on Azeroth. Needless to say, the Venture Capital Company was the most hated financial group. This group of bastards dared to trample all the laws in the world for money. They mined ore resources everywhere, abused explosives to blow up fish, used large amounts of mercury to extract gold, turned rivers into rivers of death, and used goblin loggers to secretly cut wood in the Night Elves' territory. Anyway, after causing trouble everywhere, they would just leave. The Night Elves and Stormwind had suffered great losses at their hands. The Alliance announced early in the morning that they would kill every employee of the Venture Capital Company they saw. Unfortunately, the Goblins were all the same in the eyes of the Alliance. As long as they were caught and no key evidence was found, every employee of the Venture Capital Company would lie and say that they were not from the company. As for the Hot Sand Group, it was actually very strong on the surface. Its headquarters was in Gadget Sand. As for the other strongholds, Winterspring Valley and Perpetual Hope Town should be a direct branch. The one who occupied Booty Bay was the rich Livigaz. Livigaz had his own power, which was the Blackwater Bandits. Booty Bay should be considered a feudal lord in the Hot Sand Group. Unfortunately, the trolls of Zul, Gurub were released by Dew and destroyed Booty Bay in one go. The trolls destroyed Livigaz's power, and the Alliance unkindly occupied Booty Bay and made it the new capital of Kul, Gurub. Rattan City was the territory of Gazruvi, a rising star. Gazruvi could be regarded as a spiritual tribe. He had original shares in the tribe and provided a lot of help in the process of the tribe establishing Orgrimmar. In return, he also obtained the control of the Golden Sea route between East Bay and Booty Bay in the north of Kalimdor, thus rising in a short time. Until Booty Bay collapsed, he operated transit trade from the tribe to the Alliance, specializing in trading goods that the tribe was embarrassed to sell publicly. But ever since the Alliance and the Horde became enemies, he had suffered huge losses. The Hot Sand Group owned several major trade cities and had considerable business all over the world. It was even involved in the slave trade and the operation of the Bloody Arena. In addition, he had more than 100,000 security forces and mercenaries. When necessary, he could summon troops from the employees and slaves who served the Hot Sand conglomerate and build a terrifying army of hundreds of thousands of people. Most of the time, no one would even consider going to war with the Hot Sand conglomerate. They were also relatively loosely organized plutocrats. Under the Alliance's sanctions, all trade was blocked. This made the gnomes even more active. If the Horde wanted to steal the Alliance's technology or resources, they had to go through them. The tribe's reliance on the Hot Sand Goblins nurtured the arrogance of the Hot Sand Goblins. From a prince of trade to a second-tier trading magnate, and then to a trading tycoon, no one cared about the Alliance. They had never thought that if the tribes that could keep the Alliance in check no longer existed, then their so-called neutral third party would be meaningless. What's more, if someone else was beaten, it would be like mud falling from their pants. The goblins were great. There was no need to look. Their pants must be full of sh*t. Even slander would be saved. There was no family in the Alliance that did not hate the goblins. In terms of the civilian side, the goblins had been implementing a variety of theft and abduction policies for hundreds of years. In addition, in order to help the Horde steal technology, the Rustwater conglomerate borrowed a lot from the Hot Sand Group, which made the Alliance's tribes angry. As long as they did trade, no matter how careful they were, there were often people who fell into the trap from time to time. For example, the Kurdalas, Alterac, and the Marcus family. The more they did trade, the more they would fall into the trap. Often, the Hot Sand borrowed the hands of ordinary people to make various shell companies to cause trouble. It could be said that there were new and old grudges. In the military, there was even more blood debt. They stole all kinds of technology, machines, and ships. The most important thing was that the dignified King William of Stormwind was sold as a slave gladiator when he lost his memory. Afterward, Stormwind pursued the responsibility of the Hammer of Misfortune arena. They directly changed the boss, saying that the former boss had run away and did not admit anything. Every year, many beautiful humans, night elves, and blood elf girls were abducted and sold. Many strong people were accidentally deceived and sold as slave gladiators, losing their lives in the arena. At the throne meeting, Duque proposed to start a war against the Hot Sand Group and the venture capital companies that shielded the Rustwater conglomerate. He received a unanimous vote in favor. It was not until the Alliance's flying fleet attacked and the heavy rain of artillery shells poured over the desert city of Gadget Sand that the Hot Sand conglomerate's boss, Hot Sand, realized that the Alliance was serious. No. The Alliance has no right to do this. I want to protest. Oh my God. My money. My money? Damn that group of Alliance mad dogs. Gather all the mercenaries, we will fight the Alliance dogs. Hot Sand was nervous and kept changing his orders. Just as he was about to go all out, he received a shocking piece of news. The number and quality of mercenaries recruited were far less than expected. What happened? That group of bastards who are like sand in the desert, didn't dare to come when they saw the money this time. Hot Sand slammed the table angrily. No. The main thing is, our best mercenaries died in Theramore. The reply of his men made Hot Sand's heart fall into the abyss. Tricks, it was all F***King tricks. When the Horde attacked, Theramore's defense was empty because the Alliance had withdrawn their elites early. Instead, they urgently recruited mercenaries from neutral trade cities such as Gadget Sand. The Alliance used mercenaries as cannon fodder to resist brainless roars, knockoff focusing Rainbow. In that battle, because the bounty offered by the Alliance was extremely high, it attracted the most capable mercenaries of the entire Hot Sand group to go to Theramore. Afterward, even though the Alliance fulfilled its promise and paid all the pensions. In fact, the Alliance had greatly weakened the war potential of the Goblins at that time. The Goblins did not have a modern air force. The Goblins, who also used technology, could not compare to the Alliance who used modern warfare. The Dark Portal 29, December 20th, 3 months after the destruction of the Orthodox Horde, the Goblins were destroyed. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.